Shalom Talmidim, ha'alef bet ha'ivrit, perek he, itzurim b'kol domeh. The Hebrew alphabet lesson 5, consonants that sound alike. In the last video, I talked to you about consonants that look alike and gave you some tips for distinguishing between them. In this video, we'll talk a bit about consonants that sound a lot alike. Beseder? Okay? Let's start with sin and samech. Now, when I say sin and samech, they sound identical, don't they? That's because they are pronounced identically. Now, it wasn't the case that they were always pronounced identically. Originally, sin was pronounced differently, but even before the time of Jesus, it seems that these two consonants had come to be pronounced the same, because we find them sometimes substituting for each other in manuscripts, where the scribe should have written sin, sometimes he's written samech. So don't try to keep these consonants separate by their sound, because they are exactly the same. You just have to remember which one comes in which Hebrew word. Sorry, this is probably the hardest of the consonant pairs we will look at. You see, sin and samech are just two of the 5 consonants called sibilants. That is, consonants that hiss, like the letter S in English. Altogether, they are sin, samech, shin, zayin, and tzadi. Do you hear how all of them have a sort of buzzing or hissing noise? Sh, s, s, z, and ts. Okay. Let's look now at shin and zayin. These two are perhaps the easiest to keep separate. Shin sounds a bit like SH in English, and doesn't sound much like sin or samech. It's got a darker sound. Shin. Zayin is also easy to tell apart from the others because it's a voiced consonant. If you put your hand on your throat when you say shin, sh, you don't feel any vibrations, do you? But when you say zayin, there are lots of vibrations. That's because when you say the consonant zayin, your vocal cords get involved. In fact, Hebrew has a lot of voiced and unvoiced consonants. A shin is unvoiced, a zayin is voiced. Don't worry if that didn't make a whole lot of sense. You don't need to know it, but it can help you keep these consonants separate. Now, what about sin, samech, and tzadi? We've already seen that sin and samech sound exactly the same. But tzadi, you hear, it's sort of like sin and samech, tzadi, but with something extra at the beginning, sort of like a T before the S sound. You hear it? Tzadi. And in fact, if I'm pronouncing this consistently the way that I mean to pronounce it, tzadi, it's also got something going on in the back of the throat. That's how tzad is pronounced in Arabic. But in modern Hebrew, most people just say ts, 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 for tzadi. Tzadi actually is one of a group of consonants called the emphatic consonants. Now, you don't exactly need to know this name, but it might help you keep them separate. The 3 emphatic consonants are pet, kof, and tzadi. I often pronounce these as their equivalents would be pronounced in Arabic, with the root of the tongue, or the very back part of the tongue, in the back of my throat. Pet, kof, and tzadi. If any of you speak Amharic or Tigray or Tigrinya or another Ethiopian language, You have similar consonants, but they're pronounced differently. Ta and ka and tsa or something. I don't do it very well. But if you have in your language a distinction between a consonant that sounds like ta and ta, or between consonants that sound like ka and ka, then by all means use that distinction in Hebrew. So here are tav and pet. Notice this is hard tav with a dagesh lene or dagesh kal in it. It's really good to try to distinguish between these two consonants in the way you pronounce Hebrew, because it will help you spell words better. But whether you pronounce pet, as I do, with an Arabic sort of pronunciation, almost as if you're swallowing the back of your tongue, pet, or if you use an Ethiopic Semitic sort of pronunciation, tet, it doesn't really matter. Just make a distinction between the two. The same thing goes for kaf, hard kaf, and kof. Whether you want to use an Arabic sort of pronunciation, kof, like I do, or an Ethiopic Semitic pronunciation, kof, doesn't really matter. But the more of a distinction you make between kof or kof and kaf, the easier it will be for you to spell words properly. The soft sound of kaf, cha, and chet basically sound identical. In modern Hebrew pronunciation, they are pronounced exactly the same, cha. It may have been that chet was originally pronounced farther back in the throat, ha, but nobody pronounces it that way anymore. So for these two, most people will end up pronouncing them exactly the same, just as they pronounce sin and samek the same to each other. We've already seen that hey and chet look a lot alike, the only difference being the gap in the hey, but at least the sound of the two is somewhat distinguishable. Hey, like an English H, and chet, as we've seen, like the soft chaf. Aleph and ayin are also somewhat similar to each other in sound. Aleph is the sound in the word uh-oh in English, called a glottal stop, whereas ayin is a rather harder sound for most people to make unless you happen to be a speaker of Arabic. Ayin. Don't worry if it doesn't sound quite right at first. It takes some practice. It might even make your throat feel sore for a few days while you're practicing saying ayin, ayin. Okay? Just impress everyone around you by walking around saying ayin. Maybe not. They might think you've gone crazy. Here's another pair. V, the soft sound from bait, and vav. In the way I pronounce the letters, they sound identical, because I use a modern Hebrew pronunciation for vav. Perhaps the original sound for vav was actually something like wow, with what would be an English W. If you pronounce wow, then it doesn't sound really anything at all like v, veit. But in the modern Hebrew pronunciation that I use for vav, it sounds identical to bait. Fortunately, there are not very many places in which the two can be confused for each other in Hebrew spelling, but keep on your toes. So now we have several classes of consonants that we've learned. Let's talk first about the labials. These are consonants made with the lips. Bait and veit, the hard and soft sounds. Pe and fe, hard and soft sounds. And mem. As you say all of these, your lips get involved. Notice that in bait and mem, your vocal cords vibrate, whereas in pe and f, they don't. So bait and mem are voiced, whereas pe is unvoiced. Next we come to the dentals, that is, consonants made near or at the teeth. Daleth and its soft form, the, tav and soft th, nun and pet are all pronounced somewhere near the teeth. Notice that Daleth and Nun are both voiced consonants, whereas Tav and Tet are not. Tet is also an emphatic consonant. Nun, like Mem on the previous set of consonants, are called nasals. That's because the sound comes out through your nose. Now we come to velars, that is, consonants made with the back of the tongue on the roof of the mouth. These are Gimel and R, its soft form, Kaf and H, its soft form, and Kof. Again, Gimel is voiced, but both Kaf and Kof aren't. And last we have the gutturals. These are the consonants that are made in the throat. Aleph, Ayin, He, and Chet. They have several special characteristics that set them apart from the other consonants that we will learn in subsequent videos.